All right, the camera that we're going to take a look at today is called the Panasonic HPX 500. And maybe you have had the opportunity to use prosumer cameras like a Canon GL2 or an XHA1 or an HVX 200 or something along those lines. And now you have a really important project and you want to get up to speed on how to use one of these full-size cameras because you want to rent one or you have a friend that has one. So I just wanted to get you up to speed really quick on some of the key differences. Now, this camera has a different battery than you may have traditionally been used to. So this is an Anton Bauer gold mount battery, and you can see that it's a pretty hefty battery as opposed to some of the batteries that you may have seen in the past. This one's kind of cool. It has a little readout, and it just goes on like that. The next thing that you're going to notice that's different on these cameras is the tripod plate. The tripod plate is just beefy, and that's what it looks like. The bottom of the camera looks like that. So you're going to want to line up that little V right there with that little V right there, and you just drop it right in there and push it forward, and it'll lock in there. Make sure it's really locked. You're also going to want to be aware that there's a slide on these more expensive tripods that allow you to find out where the center of gravity is of the camera. And I don't have time to go into detail about that right now. I just want to really get you up and going. But generally, it's going to be here unless you have something like a matte box on the front, and then you're going to be playing with this until you get the camera to where it's not wanting to dip down like this one is right now. It's a little bit front heavy, so I'm going to go ahead and scoot it back a notch. And it should just stay. Should stay wherever I point it. Yep. So good to go there. Now, most all these cameras have the power on in the same spot. Now, I'm shooting this by myself, so you're going to have to forgive me if I'm out of focus here on some of these, but you're going to notice that the power on is, let me zoom out a little bit. Power on's right here. So go ahead and flip it on. You're going to notice that the LCD will light up. First thing that you're going to want to check is what you have your ND at. If you're shooting outdoors, you're probably going to want this at 1, 2, 3, or 4. ND's just like the other cameras, neutral density. You can see what it does to this hand here, 2, 3, and 4. See our little readout here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is get into the ballpark range. So if we open this all the way up, because we're shooting indoors, most likely you're going to be at 1, depending on how much light you have on your subject. So I'm at ND1 for this shot. Right now, our iris, which is a little bit different than what you may be used to on a consumer camera. So on your consumer camera, you may have had a dial that did this. This is a full-on lens like you would find on a typical 35mm camera. You're letting in maximum light at 1.8. At 16, you're letting in very little light. Let's see what that looks like on the LCD. So again, I'm shooting this with by myself, so I'm trying to do everything at once. But here's f16, and here's all the way open. I like to generally shoot open to get that showered up the field look, so I'm going to actually go all the way to ND3, which I can get away with because we've got a lot of light on our subject here. And let me actually focus a little bit more. There we go. Because we've got a lot of light on our subject, and this camera is really sensitive with its 2/3 inch chips. So I'm going to push in, and to focus on this camera, it's a little bit different. You do not have any focus like you would typically see on a consumer camera. You would have autofocus. This camera has distance markings. You're going to notice that here we're at 2 feet, 2.5, 3, 4.5, 6, all the way up to infinity or 50 feet. 50 feet, and then that little symbol's for infinity. So you are manually focusing these cameras, and you can see what happens here. If we find our talent, there's 50, and we're just trying to get in the... Pushing in all the way is my solution to getting great focus, so I'm zooming in all the way. And we have one more thing to help us on this camera in particular. It's called Focus Assist. I'm going to press that button. You're going to notice that we get a little histogram in the corner here, and this will help us when we get right into focus. Bam, it's starting to let us know by giving us a lot thicker histogram. So there you go. I like to also check the eyes for focus, and then go ahead and zoom out and frame up your shot. Now the way that I'm zooming on this camera is different. Also, you have something here underneath. It's kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can get you into the light here. Maybe right there. There's a little servo or manual button. So if we flip this switch, we're now on servo, which is probably more like what you're used to. Servo is here. Typical of most cameras. You can zoom in, zoom out, and you can actually see the gears spinning there. Another thing that's worth noting right there is that little iris control for auto iris. So you can set the iris to auto, and it will do its job there. So you'll notice that if we go ahead and zoom back into our LCD, focus there. So let's go ahead and zoom in. And you'll notice that as we start to move around the frame, that we get different exposures, 2.8, 2.8, 2.0, all the way open. Which brings us to our next test here. We want to take a look at how we can adjust the white balance. On this camera, there are a couple settings for white balance. You actually pull the camera off for a second, and you can see white balance. And you can see that there is a preset which you could set to indoor or outdoor, and then you can also special set your own for A and B. So we'll set A real quick. So you might have had a white balance that was off. And if your white balance is off, you're not going to have very good skin tones. So let me just mess up the white balance intentionally really quick. There goes a bad white balance. So here's what our bad white balance might look like. So if we go back to our subject here, you can see that our skin tones don't look correct. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in till the white fills up the frame. She's nice enough to hold this white piece of paper for us. And we're going to use this little button up front. So here's what you got to push. This little switch, you're going to slide it up, and that will give you your white balance. So let's again fill up the frame. Let's flip that little switch up. So we're doing A, and now we're at 5.2. That's 5.2K. And if we go up, her flesh tones should look good. That looks great. Another thing to look at is the recording format on this camera. We're right now recording in 1080i. You want to get used to how the menus work on this camera. The menu is this button down here. Kind of hard to see in the bottom, right down here. And if we press the menu, you can jump in. And there's certain things that you want to know about. You want to know what format you're recording in. Most people are going to be recording in 6DI. If you're shooting a film, you might want to be in 24p. I like the 30p look. And you don't have to be concerned with shutter if you don't want to, because in this camera, there's a little thing here that looks like a cockpit warfighter or something. This is going to launch your missiles. But anyways, you can just turn the shutter off, and what it'll do is it'll just give you, depending on what you're shooting at. Say, for instance, if you're shooting at 60i, you're going to get 1/60th of a second. If you're shooting at 24p, you might be getting 1/48th of a second, or you will be getting those settings if you turn it off. But you can adjust the shutter for different effects if you'd like. Last step to take a look at is gain before we move on to audio. So gain is something that you want to be aware of. I have it all the way at low because we're lighting up the scene. Remember, gain's going to add grain, but in a low light situation, like maybe down here on the floor. See if we can get a shot here of the floor. Let's turn ND off. And kind of see the floor down there. Man, this camera is great in low light. We don't even have to add gain here. Wow. Anyways, here's what would happen if we added a 6 dB of gain, 12 dB of gain. You can just see that the scene gets really bright. All right, so that's the gain. Gain adds grain, adds artificial brightness. Let's jump back down to ND3, and let's take a look at one more thing, and that's the audio. You're going to notice that you can add a shotgun mic to the front of the camera, right here on the front, and you have two XLRs on the front, which are down here. So that's camera input 1. You would just lead your mic in, and then you would be able to adjust the levels right back here on the top. Now, if your mic takes phantom power, you are going to want to jump into the audio setup, and you're going to want to go down to the microphone power, and you're going to want to turn that from off to on so that you're getting microphone power. You also can control audio tracks 3 and 4 underneath here. So there's 3 and 4, and 1 and 2 are here. That wraps it up. Thanks for watching, guys.